nations of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, are watching the tense relationship between the United States and China with increasing anxiety.
Because the nations of ASEAN are focused on growth, and they worry that if we have a trade war, who's going to benefit? That will be the grass getting trampled.
With the U.S. elections looming, the outcome may significantly influence ASEAN's trajectory in the coming years. The Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy has forwarded new cooperation with countries like Vietnam and the Philippines. But will these partnerships strengthen, or will new policies disrupt the fragile balance?
Trump's presidency will, I feel, give more opportunities and more space for China to become the dominant power in Southeast Asia.
There are plenty of people in ASEAN who aren't particularly troubled by the idea of Trump 2.0 because he's seen as a tough guy. He's seen as someone who stands up to China.
How could the economic ties evolve? And what will this mean for Beijing and Washington's ongoing battle for influence in the Indo-Pacific?
ASEAN can see how they can gain from all the different competing powers who want to maintain their presence and influence in the region. You've got to work with ASEAN partners. You've got to work with ASEAN countries, and ASEAN countries know that.
This is Global Insights by Network 2020. Today, ASEAN nations and the 2024 U.S. presidential elections. Today, we're joined by Ambassador Ted Osius and Dr. Pek Kun Heng. Ambassador Osius is the former U.S. ambassador to Vietnam and president and CEO of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. Dr. Pek Kun Heng is assistant professor emerita and former director of the ASEAN Studies Initiative at American University's School of International Service. Moderating the discussion is Courtney Doggett, president of Network 2020.
Professor Heng, I'd like to start with you. Could you set the stage for us? Kindly give us a primer on ASEAN. What are its achievements, its objectives, and limitations, importantly? And how has the association served as a diplomatic platform, not only for its nations, but also for the U.S. and China?
Thank you, Courtney. Thank you very much for inviting me, to on this panel. So I will address, the questions posed to me. What is ASEAN? What is the ASEAN way? And how it operates. But let me first quickly talk about the objectives and when it was founded. It was formed in 1967, the height of the Vietnam War, where the 5 non-communist ASEAN founding members, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and the Philippines, they saw economic cooperation and raising incomes as the best antidote to defeat communist insurgencies in their own countries and in the area. And so from the beginning, ASEAN is not a military pact. It was formed for economic cooperation, and it is a regional political and economic grouping that seeks to be non-aligned and to maintain regional autonomy. And it is also, it is not an EU, it does not operate like the EU. EU is a supra-governmental organization in which member states cede sovereignty to the EU bureaucrats and the parliamentarians in order to conform to EU standards regulating all sectors. ASEAN, on the other hand, is an intergovernmental organization where powers of decision-making, policy implementation rest with each individual ASEAN member. When governing the 3 ASEAN communities, there is the ASEAN Political Security Community, there's the ASEAN Economic Community, and there's the ASEAN Social Cultural Community. So in effect, ASEAN's way of operational mode, it has to reconcile 10 different national positions on any given regional or global issue. So, and the secretariat that's based in Jakarta is very, very small. It coordinates activities of some 1,000 ASEAN meetings hosted by the sitting chair, and the chair rotates every year among the 10 members. And the secretary has no power to enforce compliance with decision made. So when we talk about the ASEAN way, that is how ASEAN operates. It's based on norms of upholding state sovereignty, adherence to non-intervention, peaceful resolution of conflict, and decision-making based on consultation and consensus. So this model has resulted in ASEAN moving at the pace of the slowest. They can't move if somebody objects to the issue that's been discussed, or not moving at all, as we see, and when there's no ASEAN consensus. And we saw that in 2021, when Cambodia was a chair, it was the first time that ASEAN did not release a joint statement because Cambodia objected to Vietnam's and Philippines' position on China's influence or intervention in the South China Sea. So then the third distinguishing difference between ASEAN and the EU is that, unlike the EU, which requires member states to embrace democracy and free market economies, there are no entry requirements in ASEAN except that you have to be located in Southeast Asia. So that means ASEAN today embraces the whole range of political systems, absolute monarchy in Brunei, a military dictatorship in Myanmar, communist regimes in Vietnam and Laos, and the authoritarian, semi-authoritarian rule in Cambodia, to democracy in Indonesia. It is unique in this sense. Now, and then quickly, achievement. There are two achievements, greatest achievements that ASEAN has achieved due to the way it operates. The first one is the creation of an enduring zone of peace. The EU has done it after, to avoid war again in Europe, and ASEAN does it, in its own unique way, where it requires, non-intervention in other countries' business, and it requires non-violent resolution and peaceful resolution to conflict, which means that there has been a peace and that no ASEAN countries have gone to war with one another ever since the organization was formed. And the other one, which isn't, I'm going to segue into Ambassador Osia's talk, is that ASEAN is now the world's 5th largest economy and has successfully attracted FDI, international businesses, created one of the most robust supply chain in the world. And it is due in no small part to the promotion of American companies in ASEAN by the US-ASEAN Business Council.
You've teed me up very well, Professor Hang.
We didn't pay you to say that.
No, you made my job very easy. First, I want to, not because she said nice things about the US-ASEAN Business Council, but because she's right, I want to emphasize a couple of points. One is, Professor Hang said the Secretariat isn't strong, doesn't have enforcement capabilities. And that's the way the ASEAN member states want it. They have designed it that way. But that doesn't mean it doesn't work. It's still, in its way, it works actually quite effectively. Professor Hang emphasized the zone of peace that ASEAN has created. That's because it has created a network of relationships. So when there is a problem, a border dispute, something like that, there is an extensive network of relationships created throughout the region. Even if they have these very different governing systems, they know each other and they work together. They know whom to call to resolve problems. That's why there is that zone of peace, which is really why ASEAN was set up in the first place. But Professor Hang also alluded to its economic importance, and let me dig in on that for a moment. Yes, it's the 5th largest economy on the planet. It's actually pretty soon it's going to be collectively the 4th largest economy on the planet, and it is fast growing. I think the data shows that for the next 30 years, ASEAN and India will be the centers of global growth, kind of the way China was for the last 30 years. Growth for the globe is going to come from Southeast Asia and from India for the next 30 years. And so that is why I think American companies are interested in the opportunities for that growth. So US-ASEAN Business Council supports about 175, 180 companies, from big ones to small ones, collectively worth $7 trillion, all engaged in ASEAN. And one of our great advantages is American companies have already been investing in ASEAN for a long time and to very high levels. So there is more U.S. direct investment in Southeast Asia than there is in China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and India combined. That we've been there for a long time. We're deeply engaged. Our companies are deeply engaged, and what that has led to, because all of that investment has led to very robust trade arrangements. So $508 billion going back and forth between the United States and Southeast Asia every year. The digital economy is growing very fast. It's expected to reach about $1 trillion by 2030. Fastest growing digital economy on the planet. Huge number of chips are exported from ASEAN to the United States, 30 billion last year. And a lot of that is centered in Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam. And I think there's a real digging in going on right now, because a lot of companies have concluded they're overexposed in China. They want to diversify. So what's an appropriate business strategy? Well, often it's stay in China, but add China plus one, and that might be an ASEAN country. It often is an ASEAN country, or China plus two. Maybe they want to also invest in India, but they want to be in ASEAN as well. So bottom line is there's the importance of ASEAN to the American economy has never been greater than it is today. And I think given the amount of tension there is in the region, especially tension between the United States and China, ASEAN is going to become only more important to the United States.
Thank you very much for those remarks. I'd love just to follow up quickly and just get your sense, because you've had an interesting experience working both within the government and outside of the government with ASEAN, as well as bilaterally with countries, and then as with ASEAN as a grouping. And I'm curious to see, are there any trends that you've seen over time, either in terms of your work with ASEAN as a group that you've seen, or in terms of the way the U.S. is approaching ASEAN?
Well, we, the United States, tend to index towards the individual countries. And why? Well, they're big and important. I mean, Indonesia is almost 300 million people. Philippines is 110 million people. Vietnam is 100 million. These are important markets, important countries in their own right. And our companies, I would say, lean in the same direction. They tend to focus on individual countries before they focus on the grouping. But the truth is we can do both. The ASEANs do both. They deal with each other as ASEAN member states within the region. Other countries deal with ASEAN on the multilateral level, and they deal with individual countries. We can do both. So we're the U.S.-ASEAN Business Council. We don't spend a huge amount of time at the ASEAN Secretariat, but we don't ignore it either. There are all kinds of ways in which the ASEAN Secretariat brings the nations together for important purposes. For example, I think the rules of the road in the digital economy are largely going to be written in ASEAN. And they're written in ASEAN because ASEAN is creating a digital economic framework agreement that will then be transported to RCEP, which is the largest trading arrangement on the planet, to the CPTPP, to ultimately probably to the WTO. We're not the only ones in town now, the United States and Europe, in terms of setting the rules of trade. Parts of the world like ASEAN are very significant in making decisions that will affect us in the long run.
Thank you for that. Dr. Heng, I'd like to turn back to you. As you mentioned, ASEAN's partnership predates the current difficult geopolitical dynamic between China and the U.S. Yet the countries themselves, we've been talking a lot about the grouping, but then also the individual countries must navigate their individual bilateral relationships along with a neutral stance as a group in its foreign relations. So how do you see this diverse partnership of countries navigating this particular geopolitical landscape?
Yeah, I will go back to a question you posed earlier on about how ASEAN serves as a diplomatic platform in the region. And ASEAN sees itself as an honest broker, serving as a neutral diplomatic platform for US, China, and all the other major powers to engage with the region. However, US-China rivalry has fractured ASEAN centrality and ASEAN unity. So what has happened is that now we can discern three ASEAN groups along the spectrum of pro-US and pro-China member states. The first group are the ones closest to China: Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. Laos and Cambodia are the most economically dependent on China, and Myanmar, the military junta, will likely collapse without Chinese purchase of its oil and also military support that it gives Myanmar. So these, especially Laos and Cambodia, are now seen as proxy states for ASEAN, in ASEAN, and China can upturn, can interfere with ASEAN decisions based on the votes cast by Laos and Cambodia. And the Philippines is the closest to the US, especially the recent strengthening of the defense cooperation with China's intrusion into the into a resupply of the Filipino naval outpost in the Second Thomas Shoal, and also deny access to the Scarborough shoals. So that is so, and then in the middle you've got these countries in the middle. In the middle, it occupies, the countries may actually trend away or closer to China or the US, depending on contingent domestic national priorities. So for the time being, I see Thailand and Brunei. I mean, they might trend closer to China. Singapore, under the new prime minister, we're not quite sure how Lawrence Wong will re-articulate its foreign policy between the two powers. And likewise, Indonesia under President-elect Prabowo, we may see that Indonesia trending towards China, when that could happen. So Malaysia and Vietnam, sort of in the middle ground. Vietnam is constrained because of its, as a border state, but it has its very important disputes with China. Now, the other factor that we see as complicating the divergent geographic landscape is the geographical division of ASEAN into mainland Southeast Asia and maritime Southeast Asia. Now, in maritime Southeast Asia, South China Sea is the most important issue, with 4 claimant states, contesting China's claims in the South China Sea. And then in mainland Southeast Asia, all these states are, the Mekong River runs through the states. And again, China poses the top economic and security political challenge, with China's ability to control the flow of river, the flow of water, with the dams that it controls in upper reaches. And so you've got that you've got this the other complication of the geopolitical landscape by the into the Mekong versus the South China Sea. Then we have so given that the ASEAN policies are determined by the domestic priorities of the 10 member states, and given the divergence in policy preferences and priorities of each country, the common ASEAN position, that we read in the ASEAN statements, I feel that they're at best performative rather than substantive, because it's so difficult, to get real substantive outcomes from these ASEAN summits meetings. And so, this go back to something that Ambassador Osius has said, that because of the complexity of working with ASEAN and navigating, the differences among ASEAN countries, the ASEAN partners have to engage with ASEAN at 3 levels. Ambassador Osius talked about how, the focus is on the individual country before going to the grouping. So there are 3 levels. The first was the multilateral, and US uses all 3. Multilateral doesn't work, as it needs to be supplemented by unilateral. So you look at the US going to other like-minded partners to deal with challenges posed by China. The Quad, bringing in India and Japan and Australia, and then AUKUS, bringing the UK as well. So then you've got, so that there's multilateral, unilateral, and bilateral. So the starting point absolutely is bilateral. You've got to work bilaterally to understand really well what are the changing, shifting domestic landscape before you can have an effective ASEAN policy.
And maybe
Terrific.
I could build on
Mm-hmm.
just build on what Professor Hang has said. If you look at kind of the Venn diagram of arrangements in the Indo-Pacific, ASEAN is at the center, and people talk about ASEAN centrality. That's actually kind of it's lost its meaning in some ways, but it is, as she said, an honest broker. It's the platform. It's the place where you can convene the great powers. So when ASEAN hosts the East Asian Summit, the United States is there, and Korea and Japan, and the key players are all there. So it serves a very critical diplomatic function. I agree with Professor Hang's characterization of the spectrum, but I would only add that Vietnam seems to have been moving towards the Philippines end of the spectrum because of concerns about Chinese behavior, both in the maritime domain and in the mainland domain. Concerns about what China's been doing in the South China Sea, and concerns about what's happening on the Mekong. That's very much affected by what happens in the upstream countries, starting with China, where more than half the water of the Mekong comes from China. And on these minilaterals, she's exactly right. These are given that you don't have one overarching structure in the region, you have multiple. And the recent structure that's been added to the list that Professor Hang provided is a trilateral involving Japan, Philippines, and the United States. And that's really interesting if you think about it, because Japanese interests and American interests in the in Southeast Asia align almost perfectly. Japan is our ally, with us, has provided stability and peace in the region for 75, 80 years. And now you have a situation in that trilateral with the Philippines, where the Japanese investment in infrastructure is meeting Philippine needs. Our investment in security is helping to address the Philippines' needs, and we're doing this together. So Japan and the United States are recognizing that economic security and national security are two sides of the same coin, and we're bringing those streams of action together in that multilateral. And then I would just add that right now there have been surveys that have been widely touted suggesting that ASEAN countries, if forced to choose, might choose China over the United States. And that's gotten headlines, and there's been sort of an alarmist attention paid to that. I would note what's going on right now. It's very controversial in the United States that we are investing so much in the Israel-Hamas conflict. Well, that's also controversial in the largest Muslim majority nation on the planet, Indonesia, or in Malaysia, which also is a Muslim majority nation, where America's role in the Middle East is very controversial. Not a huge surprise. The truth is, countries do not want to be forced to choose wherever they are on the spectrum. They want agency. They want to be able to decide their own futures, and don't want to be forced by the great powers to choose. They want to work with everybody, and a lot of the ASEAN follow the kind of dictum: if the elephants are fighting, well, the grass gets trampled, and the ASEAN states are the grass. They don't want to get trampled. They also don't. If the elephants are making love, the grass gets trampled too. So they don't really want a G2. They like some competition between the United States and China. They just don't want it to get out of hand.
Are you ready to expand your global perspective? Network 2020 is a community of global citizens who are working together to shape the future of foreign policy. We believe in the power of people-to-people connections to drive positive change. Join us to access exclusive events, thought-provoking discussions, and opportunities to connect with a network of passionate individuals who share your commitment to a better world. Donate or become a member today to help us build a more informed and interconnected world.
I wanted to mention one point because the Mekong River came up a couple of times, and I just want to point out for those who might be interested in that, the Stimson Center actually has a really wonderful interactive map of just water flows on the Mekong for anyone who really wants to geek out on that information. And Ambassador Osius, I'd love to follow up because you're alluding to something that we keep hearing time and again, which is that this idea of choosing is one that is really just a false structure. It's a false rubric that doesn't exist. And increasingly, we're seeing a world that, we've heard the term anything from fuzzy bifurcation to polyamorous. And so the political relationships are different than the economic relationships. And I'd love for you to just dig into a little bit what that looks like on the economic side, how our country is trying to not get trampled either way within the economic realm.
Well, first on the Mekong, let me just add one thought, and that is there's a wonderful book out, Last Days of the Mighty Mekong, written by Brian Eiler of the Stimson Center, that explores that very in great depth and very effectively. That's a big challenge for 250 million people who depend on the Mekong for their survival. But then on the fracturing, let me focus on one piece of it, and that's the internet, because the internet is driving a lot of our economies. It's having a truly fractured internet doesn't seem to me to be in anyone's interest. Mm-hmm. But having one internet where countries absolutely control the content that their citizens see, and other parts of the internet where everyone has access to information. That's not a great arrangement. Having a free and open internet, which is what the United States tends to push for, is beneficial. It's beneficial to the globe, and it's beneficial to international relations. It makes a big difference economically to all the countries that depend on the internet as a kind of lifeline for their prosperity. So that's one of the places where the competition is playing out. And it's actually one of the reasons why Southeast Asia is so interesting, because the United States wants to have secure, resilient supply chains, want to have access to computer chips, for example, where we know that there's integrity in the supply process, and we'll be able to protect the security of our nation, of our assets, whilst having a free and open internet. That's very important. And that's part of the reason that you see more investment flowing into ASEAN. There are other ways in which the region worries about two very, very different approaches to growth, because the nations of ASEAN are focused on growth. They're focused on economic growth. And they worry that if we have a trade war between the United States and China, who's going to benefit? That will be the grass getting trampled.
Right.
And so I look at it through the economic prism. Obviously, there are security implications if the competition gets out of hand, but I would say very profound economic implications for everybody.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Hang, having had a taste of both the Biden and the Trump administration, what do you think ASEAN should be prepared for in the coming U.S. election?
Thank you. So let me just go back to Ambassador Osia's comment about, for the first time, the survey shows that if ASEAN to force to choose, China now has advantage over the US, the first time ever. However, and at the same time, we have to be aware also that the level of trust towards China is much lower, than the level of trust shown to the US. ASEAN countries on the whole, they trust US more for upholding the rule of law and the norms of free trade better than they trust China. So that is important, a factor to look at. Now, so going to Biden and Trump. So when Biden took over from Trump in 2021, there was a slight uptick in the level of confidence, towards the US, but that has since been dissipated, as Ambassador Osia says. The Hamas war, because 40% of the population in ASEAN are Muslims. And also, so there's one that is, the Hamas, and then the Israel war and America's support for Israel. And the second one is economic, is that there is, really, ASEAN don't see an alternative to the TPP that would have enabled qualifying ASEAN members access to the American market and a high quality free trade, multilateral free trade arrangement. iPad is seen to be a very poor substitute because it does not allow access to the American market. Now, by contrast, China is ASEAN's number one trade partner. ASEAN derives benefits from the China-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement and also, of course, the BRI investments that is available to ASEAN. So under Biden, if Biden wins the elections, I don't see that decline as being stopped. I see that it will, because there's no economic alternative in the US. They're looking for an economic alternative. There's none there. And Hamas, the war in Israel may drag on. So, but having said that, the return of Trump holds even less appeal for ASEAN. Mega on steroids. What will this mean? Protectionist policies, the unpredictability of Trump. And so that Trump's presidency will, I feel, give more opportunities and more space for China to become the dominant power in Southeast Asia. I'll just quickly end on a more positive point. 3 points to make. So there are 3 areas, and Ambassador Osius have alluded to one of them already, or 2 of them. So there are 3 areas where ASEAN wants the US to work constructively and to achieve its objectives. The first one is for the US to help transform ASEAN's transformation into a regional digital economy, through the digital economic framework, and that will guarantee employment and growth because of the young population and the importance of digitalization in the region. And this is where there's this contest between the US and ASEAN and China with the different rules governing digital protocol, and that's something that has to be worked out. Then secondly, climate change, and that's where the US and ASEAN and China can work more comfortably. Climate change, and again that's something that ASEAN really wants, transitioning to a green economy. And the third area is a new area, the rapid and expanding rise of cyber scam centers. So this is something that's been identified for the first time by the survey, that it's become a key issue because this is a report that's been released by USIP on transnational crime in Southeast Asia, where it says that there are as many as 300,000 victims who have been scammed, forced into illegal activities in the centers to operate online scamming and fraud operations to facilitate financial crimes. And most of the compounds are in Myanmar and Laos and Cambodia. And the report says that in the income or the funds stolen by the criminal syndicates in the Mekong countries, it mounts up to $44 billion, which is 40% of the combined formal GDP of Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar. It's huge. And scam victims the majority have so far been in China, but they're increasing victims in the US now. So I see this as an area, again, where US, ASEAN, China cooperation can work and can, we're not talking about either or. We're talking about a win-win, kind of a cooperation that the US and China can engage ASEAN with.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for bringing it up. That's a really interesting area. Ambassador Osius, in what ways do American business interests align with ASEAN's economic goals within the context of China's growing economic presence? And if you want to put on your forecaster hat, how do you see a second Trump or Biden administration impacting U.S. economic policy in the region?
I think American companies don't want to see a trade war. I think there's a concern that if you impose 10% tariffs across the board, that would lead to real problems, not just for our companies, but for our economies. And you only have to look, there's an historic precedent when in the 1930s, there were very high tariffs placed on any imports into the United States, led to a trade war and led to contributed to World War II, what happened in the middle of the last century. The Biden administration has paid a lot of attention to ASEAN. I think there are only out of 6 countries that both the president and vice president have visited, 2 were ASEAN countries, Vietnam and Indonesia. And that's taking into account the time that nobody was traveling during the pandemic. The IPEF, though, as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, as Professor Hang said, is not a great substitute for a free trade agreement that gives market access. It does have pillars that are of real interest to our companies. The pillars, they call them pillars, they're really sectors or areas where agreement is needed. Supply chain resilience, the green energy transition, and tax and anti-corruption. And those are actually being implemented already. So there's a lot of investment going into the green infrastructure as a result of the IPEF pillar that's been completed on the green energy transition, and a lot of work being done in the Indo-Pacific on strengthening the resilience of supply chains. So that's good news. I think there are plenty of people in ASEAN who aren't particularly troubled by the idea of Trump 2.0 because he's seen as a tough guy. He's seen as someone who stands up to China. But then they also look at the Biden administration, which has been also pretty tough, especially in imposing tariffs on key Chinese goods. So I don't think there's a uniform view across ASEAN, just as there isn't a uniform view across U.S. companies about which is the better scenario in November. But business likes stability, predictability. That matters in the business context. And the Biden administration, we kind of know where it's going. It's pretty predictable. I wish they had a stronger trade policy, but our politics don't allow that at the moment. There's been a reversal of U.S. trade politics, so that you don't have a whole lot of Republicans arguing for free trade. That used to be the party that argued for free trade, and then you have a lot of Democrats who voice their concerns about inequality, environment, and labor, the aspects of trade that are troubling. And so until we can get our act together, we're not going to be taking full advantage of the opportunities that exist for us in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. Thank you. What I'll try to do now, I have one question here, and I will see, given we have about 5 minutes left, maybe each of you can take a crack at it, and I'll start with you, Dr. Heng. How effective do you consider the current U.S. strategy of, quote, forcing Southeast Asian countries to choose their diplomatic stance between China and the U.S., especially since many of those countries don't want to be forced to choose? So we talked a little bit about this before. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, would you agree, are they being forced to choose? Is that sort of what you see as the U.S. policy? And if not, or even if so, what would you recommend switching in order to continue a policy that is stable and effective within the region? So Dr. Heng, we'll start with you and then turn to you, Ambassador.
No, I don't think it is true that U.S. is forcing ASEAN countries to choose. No, absolutely not. I mean, you hear in every foreign in every announcement come from the U.S., we don't force you to choose. We do not want you to choose, but you have to decide what you can get from us, and this is what we can offer you. So really, I don't think this is a loose proposition. ASEAN countries are playing the game. They know what the U.S. can give them: security, more than anything else, security goods, and then economic. The presence of the U.S. companies. They do a lot of they push growth, and especially with digitalization and clean energy and other issues. So U.S. remains important, and then they can get from China what they can't get from the U.S. So in a way, ASEAN plays both sides. ASEAN is, as investors also says, an agent It's agency. It plays both sides to get what it can. It's better to have, and then it now plays more than both sides. It looks at Australia, it looks at Japan, it looks at India to get what they can, and that's why ASEAN remains, viable because they work together because they see how they can gain from all the different competing powers who want, to maintain their presence and influence in the region. You've got to work with ASEAN partners. You've got to work with ASEAN countries, and ASEAN countries know that.
It would probably be more interesting if Professor Heng and I were arguing, but we're not. I agree very much with her assessment. The United States is not forcing countries to choose. I think the approach of the United States is make sure ASEAN countries have the freedom to make strategic choices. None of those countries want to be vassal states of China. They want to benefit from China's prosperity. Their supply chains are often quite integrated. They want to access to China's market, but they don't want to be vassal states. They want agency. They want to choose their own fates. And I think the approach that the United States has generally taken, and I hope we continue to take, is make sure that countries in the region have strategic options, can engage fully with everyone in the world, certainly with us, but with everyone in the world, and aren't in a position where they have to constantly bow to the will of China. They're the 800-pound gorilla that's above them, the largest and most powerful nation in the region. And I think that means we have to have strategies that involve strengthening friendships, alliances, partnerships in the region. And we have to get our act together economically and make sure that we're good options economically to the neighbors.
That's the main thing,
That I think begs a follow-up question. What would you most like to see if you wanted to have good economic options?
I'd like to see a trade policy that allows for the possibility of market access, because that's a trade policy that will be embraced in the region. I would like us to seize the opportunity to engage with ASEAN on critical minerals, on the energy transition, provides incentives for engaging with the United States and not just with their near neighbors or with China. I'd like to see us back in the game and setting the rules of the game for trade. We're partly there with IPEF, but we want to be all the way there. We want to have a robust trade policy in order to further our strategic interests, not just our commercial interests, but our strategic interests. I think that's the name of the game.
Absolutely agree. Strategic interests, commercial and economic interests will boost strategic interests, and an IPEF plus, or if in a return to a CPTPP kind of arrangement, which the rules of which were actually negotiated by U.S. ASEAN Business Council. Absolutely. It was
by us, the United States.
Absolutely. That was it. And this is what the Southeast Asians want, this is what ASEAN wants. And it has not been possible, but let's hope it will be possible, for that agreement to come back.
On that forward-looking note, I think we've reached the hour. Thank you, Dr. Heng. Thank you, Ambassador Osius. This was fascinating, eye-opening. I really appreciate your depth of knowledge. It's a lot to keep track of, I think, within all the different nations that are part of ASEAN. So really appreciate your insights. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Dr.
Bye.
Great to see you.
Thank you. That's Osius.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Global Insights. Voiceover host and editor for this episode is Casey Craig, with production support from Brian Thom. You can subscribe to Global Insights on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your audio. For more analysis, events, and ways to connect with our community, click on the link in the description. See you next time.